I call to order the meeting of the Michigan State Board of Canvassers. The meeting has been announced and posted in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. Member Daunt was unable to join us today because of a family emergency, so I will be chairing the meeting. The first order of business is agenda item 2. The first order of business is agenda item 1. We are going to do public comment before we consider the other items on the agenda. With regard to item number 6, consideration of the 100-word statement of purpose for House Joint Resolution R, we will take public comment on that item when we address that item. I believe there is other public comment. It has been our practice to allow 3 minutes for public comment at the beginning of the meeting for matters that are not related to specific agenda items. So do we have public comment today?
I think we have Mr. Gallant.
Yes, this is James Gallant, Marquette County Suicide Prevention Coalition. These are my opinions. And Madam Chair, please protect my rights. I have an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act in order to fully participate and address all agenda items that are approved on the agenda. There are no blue cards for me, but I am signed up to do that. So, Chairman, our secretary here, Mr. Brader, has determined that all questions under the Constitution must be in the affirmative. Yes means yes, no means no. Because Mike Brady, the Director of Legal Services, has determined that all deliberative assemblies in Michigan are under the Constitution must follow Robert's Rules of Order newly revised, that's where all the members, all your rights come from, is the Robert's Rules of Order, and it's required under the Constitution. Yet Mr. Brader has recommended that you find a petition insufficient. When you vote yes, it means no. So Mr. Brader is an attorney that is not authorized to practice law in Michigan. Please resist his attempts to persuade you to circumvent the Constitution. Please schedule a special meeting to positively identify the legitimately approved rules of procedure here that have been voted on. You just said, Madam Chair, that this is your current practice. I do not believe they've ever voted on 3 minutes at the discretion of the chair, which Mr. Brader said as the secretary. I don't think that's ever been voted on. So your current practices here don't apply. Point of order, please. This is serious. And this is why Wayne County was allowed to vote twice on the same motion. The second motion in 2020 for the presidential election was automatically null and void under Robert's Rules of Order. And you notice what he did? He waived reconsideration after the second vote, but he didn't after the first vote. So everybody had the right to motion of reconsideration, then they violated everybody's rights. Now, Secretary Brader here, his mother was doing the exact same thing back in 1990 as the mayor of Ann Arbor. She immediately started entertaining motions without a second, no discussion, and gavelled through it to vote. Bullying people. That's the bullying. And please resist that, Madam Chair, and please follow the rules. It's Robert's rules. Please schedule a public meeting to positively identify the rules of procedure. The county clerks in Ingham County, Marquette County, Wayne County, they said they have no rules of procedure, and all they follow is your dictated manual for county canvassers. The state cannot dictate to the counties. These are county created these boards, and they appoint these boards, and the rules of procedure from the county board of commissioners applies at these county commissions or county canvassers. And yet you're rifling it through. And I believe Secretary Benson is the one that started this breach. At the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, she started right out with discussion and did not take a motion. Now, page 366, line 8 says, you shall not have any debate before there's a motion. And now you're going to do that same thing right now. I believe your current practice is to start with discussion, and you're going to find it insufficient because that's a recommendation. But that circumvents the Constitution, and it's happened. The voter integrity fraud appears to be happening right here at your hand, Madam Chair. So please figure out what the rules are, and because you're in charge, you're the presiding officer, you are the one responsible for this under the Constitution and under your appointment by the government. And geez, you've been doing it so long, I don't think you really know what the rules are. You're going by current practice, but you were taught when you got here, oh, this is how we do it here. And you said, okay.
That is your 3 minutes. We will allow you 3 minutes when item 6 comes up as well. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the meeting minutes for approval for the meeting from July 21st, 2022.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes of the previous meeting on July 21st, 2022.
Do we have support? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The next item is certification of the August 2nd, 2022 primary election. Mr. Brader?
Thank you, Vice Chair Gerwitz. So this was our first election since the new legislative districts were implemented. So it was a very challenging election for our clerks to administer for a variety of reasons. One is just that you have voters in new precincts, new districts, new ballots. There's a lot to keep track of there, and a lot of voters who have questions, who are new places. So that was certainly a major undertaking for the state and for the clerks. Second, the August primary is always difficult to manage because you have a ballot style that only allows you to vote in one party's primary. Some voters get confused by that. They might spoil their ballots by voting on both sides. We also have on the August primaries a precinct delegate race, which means that every single precinct has a different ballot style, which is not typically the case. So from a ballot standpoint, it's hard to manage that. And then also this was a difficult environment for our clerks just because of the environment out there. There's a lot of harassment and there's a lot of baseless claims being made about our election officials and public servants. So with all of that in consideration, especially, I think our clerks did a really excellent job of administering this election. I'd like to commend both the county and municipal clerks and their staff, along with all of our election workers for their great work. We saw relatively few issues, positive voting experiences. And we also saw, by and large, across the state, clerks doing a great job of keeping precincts in balance, making sure that the number of ballots tabulated matched the list of voters for each precinct, or if it was off, that there was actually an explanation for it, such as a voter checking in but then leaving with their ballot without voting it. Overall, compared to August 2020, which is our last comparable primary, we saw the numbers were significantly improved when it came to balanced precincts. I want to especially commend Wayne County and Detroit on this because this was a subject of a lot of discussion 2 years ago at this time. At that time, there were a lot of concerns about the percentage of out of balance precincts in Detroit and in Wayne County. August 2020 countywide, 56% of the precincts in the county were fully balanced or explained. And in Detroit in August 2020, 26% were fully balanced or explained. When we looked at that time countywide and citywide, there was little difference between the number of the ballots cast and list of voters across the entire jurisdiction. So it was mostly an issue of ballots being tabulated in the wrong precinct or administrative errors, but it still creates problems because those precincts often cannot be recounted if they're not balanced or explained during the canvass. So since that time, the clerks and their staff and election workers have worked extremely hard to implement improvements to better track and balance those ballots. And the numbers, both statewide, but especially in Wayne County and Detroit, definitely bear that out. So for August 2022, in Wayne County, 98% of the precincts were fully balanced compared to 56% in 2020. And also in Detroit, 98% of the precincts were fully balanced or explained compared to 26%. So obviously that's a massive improvement. And then additionally, those that are off still are typically off by 1 or 2, where in the past there were some that were off by 4 or 5 or more, which was a larger concern. So I just want to call out and commend especially those clerks, their staff, and also the Wayne County Board of Canvassers for all their hard work in implementing all those improvements. And then a note on turnout. We had pretty high turnout for this primary. We had about 2.1 million people voting. That's almost as high as we saw in August 2018 in the last gubernatorial primary, where we had 2.2 million people voting. And in that one, of course, we had contested governor primaries on both sides. So in light of that, I think we're probably looking at a high turnout for November. I'm not going to guess a number, but we're, I think, trending towards a lot of people voting in November as well. On the issue of write-ins, we discussed previously the possibility of write-in candidate possibly, winning or being close statewide with a Craig candidacy. That didn't materialize as Dixon was the clear winner by a significant margin. But we did, so we don't have a statewide breakdown of all of the variations in each precinct, but we do have some examples for you to look at. we actually did not, one of the things that we were talking about was the importance of making sure that people who wrote different variations of declared write-in candidates' names had their ballots counted, not differently based on where they were. And we actually didn't see any examples where somebody tried to write a candidate's name, including like Chief Craig's name, where it wasn't counted. So there were no cases that we identified where the name was misspelled or Chief Craig was written or anything like that, where it was not counted as a vote for him. So that would be consistent with what the Bureau would recommend, is to try to honor the voter's choice, even if there's a spelling error or something like that. Where there were not, where we did see that write-in candidates were rejected, it was because they wrote the names of folks who weren't declared as write-ins, or there were some creative submissions like cartoon characters, which obviously were not canvassed. So I do think that when we have all 4 board members, it would still be helpful for the board to talk a little bit more about the standards they want to apply, so that in the future, our counties are canvassing everything consistently. Having said that, based on what we've seen, it does look like the canvassers in each county are trying to count the votes and not penalizing voters if there's a spelling error. But I still think that more clarity and consistency and guidance from the state board, which ultimately will be the entity that decides if we have a close race, would be helpful. Last issue I want to note is we had another write-in issue, which was in the 4th congressional district, Democratic primary. And there was no Democrat on the ballot, but Joseph Alonso ran as a write-in. And to qualify for the November ballot, he had to get at least 5% of the votes that the Democratic governor candidate got. And he was able to do that by a substantial margin. He needed about 3,000 votes and he got about 10,000. So we are recommending that he qualify. And then we will also later on be asking for the board to authorize the Bureau to conduct any recounts that are requested on behalf of the board. We are anticipating at least one. The House Republican primary in the 34th House District in Lenawee County was a 7-vote margin based on the certified results. So we're anticipating a recount request there. But with that, we have the list of nominees based on the certified results from the county canvasses that we are recommending that the board certify.
Okay. Any questions?
I do. I have a couple. And I appreciate Director Brader you going over election day, but I do have a couple of just quick questions. One, obviously with a turnout of 2.1, what was the percentage that was actually absentee ballots?
I think it was roughly half. I don't have the exact number. If anyone on staff has it, we can try to get you the exact number.
Secondly, obviously, I think I am the only board member left that was here for 2020. But were there any other city issues? I mean, we always, when we sit on this board, everyone always brings up Detroit, but were there any other issues on election day in any other cities or townships that, we should kind of be aware of outside of always the big one that everyone talks about?
Well, in Wayne County, there was an issue in e-course where the city clerk identified about 30 to 40, I think, absent voter ballots that had not been tabulated on election day. They should have been. They were still in the sealed envelope signed by the voter, and they were in a secure location in the clerk's office. So in that case, the board has authority to tabulate ballots that should have been tabulated. In that case, because of the fact that they were still in the sealed envelopes signed by the voter and they were in the clerk's office, it was the board's decision, but the Bureau, I think, would agree that that was the right thing to do. So that was something where obviously the clerks, and there were other scattered examples of absent voter ballots that didn't get tabulated. I wouldn't say more than we normally see, but that's definitely a point of emphasis for November. Especially, we can continue to expect to see a high volume of absentee voting. Clerks definitely need to continue to have protocols to make sure that every ballot that arrives by 8 p.m. is checked in and then sent for tabulation. The other issues that we saw, I think, primarily related to like ballot issuance issues. So you always see some cases where voters get issued the wrong ballot. The clerk mistakenly issues a ballot for a different precinct. That's especially the case in August primaries for the reasons that I said, because every single precinct has a different ballot style. So in another election, if you send someone, there's fewer choices for a ballot to send them, so you're less likely to send them the wrong ballot. But we did see some cases where voters were issued incorrect ballots. I would say that was the major the major issue we saw. It'll be less of a problem first. I mean, it doesn't affect statewide races, but it does at the local level potentially mean that people have to spoil those ballots and get issued the right ballots. And if they don't, that can create problems with a canvas. So that was the other, I would say, biggest issue we saw.
And lastly, Madam Chair, I have one last question here. When we talk about returns and we talk about modems, I know that kind of, we have approved here any kind of software or modem updates or anything like that. Can you speak a little bit about returns and some of the issues that they had with, I think it was the 3G modems that are no longer allowed or.
Yeah, so we're phasing out the use of modems to send unofficial results. We've talked about that at previous board meetings when we were certifying new systems. There are still some jurisdictions in Michigan that still use modems to send the unofficial results. It's done under a secure encrypted transfer, and the modems are only connected after the polls close. So it is a secure system, but the national trend and the best practice and ultimately what the standards will require at the federal level for machines in the future is to not use any modems to send the unofficial results. So most of our jurisdictions have moved off that at this point. All of the Dominion jurisdictions have moved off it. The issue with 3G there was that they just weren't, those modems aren't supported anymore, so they can't really use them. So that was the major impetus for moving them all off. With the ES&S jurisdictions, including like Macomb County, we approved a new version of that system without modeming, so they've moved off that there. So what most of the country does when you don't modem from the tabulators is you either take the drive out of the machine and bring that to be read in to the county, or you can also take it to a city or township computer and then take the results off that and then send that result to the county over a secure file transfer program. So that's what our jurisdictions are doing. I think that they've done some admirable work so far to basically do this for the first time in a major election. And I think overall they're doing a really good job, but certainly, over time as our clerks get used to this process, I think it will go a bit faster. It's just a question of making sure you have good procedures in place to quickly but accurately get the results from the precinct to the city or township and then to the county. Obviously, we want to prioritize accuracy over speed, but certainly we understand that everyone wants to know what the unofficial results are as soon as possible. It's never going to be as fast as sending it right from the tabulator, but I do think that in some places, especially our larger jurisdictions where there's more precincts to keep track of, we do expect that process will get more efficient. At the same time, there'll probably be more ballots to deal with in November, so they'll have to work through that. But I think the process is working pretty well so far, and it's just a matter of refining those procedures.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I do want to echo your accomplishments for the clerks and the election workers around the state for their hard work.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, so on the agenda is the certification of the August 2nd, 2022 primary election. Do we have a motion?
Based on the examination of the returns received by the Secretary of State for the August 2nd, 2022 primary, I move that the Board of State Canvassers certify that the attached report is a true statement of the votes cast at the primary for the offices certified by this board. I further move that the board certify that the persons named in the following list of nominees are duly nominated for the offices indicated and are qualified to appear as candidates for such offices on the November 8th, 2022 general election ballot.
We have support.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Do we have another motion?
Madam Vice Chair, may I interrupt a second? Can I ask the court reporter to record the time of that motion? I have it as 10:21 a.m. Thank you.
Do we have another motion?
We do. I move that the Board of State Canvassers authorize the staff of the Bureau of Elections to represent the board in any recount of votes cast at the August 2nd, 2022 primary election.
Support? It has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much for that report, Director Brader. It was very encouraging. The next item on the agenda is consideration of the qualifying petitions submitted by Barry Altman for the office of State Senator, 3rd District. And we have a speaker who wants to address that issue. Do you want to first summarize what it is about, Director Brader?
Sure, and I will just add in the last item, I got the number. It was about 1.1 million absentee ballots, so slightly over half were cast by absentee ballot. So this issue concerns a petition submitted by Barry Altman as an independent candidate. The board has to certify for the November ballot petitions that are submitted by independent candidates. In this case, I'm sorry, I'm just bringing up the report here. Do you have a copy of it? Yeah. Sorry. I just want to make sure I get the numbers right. So in this case, he's an independent candidate for the state senate in the 3rd district. The number of valid signatures required for this office is 1,500. Mr. Altman submitted exactly 1,500 signatures, which obviously means that every single one of them needs to be valid, which is a difficult threshold to meet. We did identify after staff review, the face review, the petition showed that 352 of them were invalid and 1,148 were valid. The biggest issue on this petition was that some of the required language was cut off at the bottom of the petition. And we have some examples in the staff report that show that the circulator statement and some of the other circulator information that needs to be listed at the bottom was cut off on some of the copies. So that alone, given the fact that he had 0 margin for error, that alone was enough to determine the petition insufficient.
Okay. Mr. Altman?
Yes.
Do you want to go to the podium and speak into the microphone, please?
Thanks.
Thank you. The petitions that I submitted, I actually am an independent candidate. I had to actually conduct every bit of that canvassing and signature gathering personally. In copying the ballots, one of them was printed off 25 times, and it was tilted, had to have been tilted in the copier. And that took off the final, the bottom line of the ballot in the fine print and cut off a little corner of the word year. So it actually was just Y-E and part of the A. But the column was complete, and people who dated it actually dated the full year. So I'm submitting to the board that this is harmless error. I think it's actually even demonstrated in the copy that was emailed to me. In addition to that, there were other minor issues, all of which would have been corrected on the spot had they been caught at the time. Again, I'm asking the board to consider the fact that the 1,500 signatures required were all gathered by me, a 61-year-old man who knocked on upwards of 5,000 doors. Myself in the heat out here. Believe me, when I started this, I was a light-skinned dude. I had to work most of those days, and I couldn't go out until about 4 o'clock in the evening when people would be home. And I would spend 4.5 hours on average to gather 30 signatures each day, approximately 1 for every 4 houses. Over 3.5 months. And in addition, there was some stand-up signature gathering petition drives that I organized. This was all done by me on practically no money, with practically no help. There are people here now who are good enough to come here from Detroit because they are signers from the district that I would represent. I worked as a counselor for Team Wellness Center. It's a mental health facility to disabled members. Chose to come with me today. There was another who comes from the Samaritan Center. This is a disabled elderly living facility, and she could not attend because she can't ride in a vehicle sitting upright for an hour. So my signatures, and also, I know that he just said there were 1,500, and I saw that on paper. I'm sure I counted 1,595 signatures. Now, I didn't count the individual ballots, but the lady who accepted the signatures counted the individual ballots. And when she notarized it, she said, well, yes, sir, is 160 sound about right? And I said, yep, sounds about right. But I'm missing some signatures. And I'm not saying anything, but listen, all of those, any of those mistakes, had they been caught at the time, they would have been corrected.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Altman. We want to commend you for the effort that you undertook to get these signatures. And I understand the position that you're advocating, that these were harmless errors and they could have been corrected. But in fact, they weren't corrected. And with regard to the elimination of some of the mandatory language, the board has consistently taken the position that those are not harmless errors. So where you did have, as Mr. Brader said, no margin for error, the Bureau is recommending that your petition be rejected.
Well, I said that I submitted 1,595 signatures, and they were the ballots themselves were counted at submission. The signatures themselves were not counted. So I signed off, and and the lady who accepted them, she said, does that sound about right? She didn't ask me, because if she had counted the signatures, I would have said, no, that's not correct. And also, ma'am, I think I'm asking the board to also consider the intent of the 1,500 signatures that you're even suggesting. Just consider what the people were actually intending when they made. I appreciate rules, I do. But we've all seen the people's will thwarted for technicality. And this is what this is. This doesn't even give me an election. It only gives me a place on the ballot, which the people have clearly demonstrated that I should be eligible.
Thank you, Mr. Altman. You've exceeded your time, and we do appreciate your coming and speaking to us. Thank you. Mr. Fracassi, do you want to tell us how the number of signatures are counted when they are filed?
Sure. So the first thing we do is we stamp the sheets. We stamp every single sheet. So when the candidate first comes in to file, we just take estimates, and it's whatever they represent to us. We don't count the signatures at the time of filing. We count those after the fact. After the filing deadline and after the candidate submits, the first thing we do is we stamp every single sheet and confirm the sheet number, and we do the face review. And during that face review, we code every single line on the sheet. So we put it into an Excel sheet, and it codes it as blank, as crossed out, as valid, whatever the status is, and that totals up and then gives us the number. So when we did that with this particular petition, we did stamp 163 sheets, and we did get 1,500 exactly as counted.
And in regard to the stamping, sir, could I ask you, please?
Mr. Altman, your time is past.
How much time was I allowed, ma'am?
I didn't know that 3 minutes, and I didn't time it specifically, but we have given you far more time than than you need, and we have to move on. Yes, certainly. Mr. Hauskamp has a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Altman.
Yes, sir.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate walking doors and collecting signatures in June is both a wonderful time and a difficult time. But I have a question for you because 80 of the signatures on 8 sheets were not a matter of copying, but they were a matter of wrong circulator information, not wrong, but incomplete.
Yes, sir.
It looks from the samples that the elections folks had shared with us,
Yes, sir.
that these were like just, you simply signed it and pushed it through.
Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
even with 1,500 signatures, you would still, even if the copying were not an issue, which it is, but even if it weren't, these 8 sheets would still invalidate.
Yes, sir. As I completed them, I signed, printed, and put the date in. And then I thought that I would come back and put the address in all of them. My address is on the top of each and every one of them. And I understand this is signature. And I confess that is an error. And I should have double checked each one and just put in my address again, even though it was at the top of the ballot also. But at the bottom, there were some that I missed putting the same address that was at the top. And yes, sir, you are correct. I'm still stating, sir, everybody, and this is just a mistake. This was the purpose of having 1,500 signatures isn't because 1,500 is some magical place and 1,499 is not. That's I understand rules, but there's an intent behind them, and you guys have to understand. This is the intent of these signers was to get me on the ballot. That was their intent, and because I'm working by myself and I don't have expensive help, I can't hire other people to help me because I'm an independent. Most of the people that I represent are poor people, quite frankly. They're poor people and they don't have a lot of money to contribute to my campaign. Most of my campaign was 99% funded by myself. And I had to go out and get signatures from other people who don't have transportation, who don't have representation, and meanwhile, the other parties pay $100 and go straight into a primary. I could have did that. I could have run it as one of the other parties. In fact, the Republican didn't even have anybody else. They had nobody. I could have paid $100 and went in uncontested. But I didn't. I did the heavy lifting so that I could be an independent. Brothers and sisters, I did the heavy lifting so I could be an independent, so I wouldn't be owned by the 2 parties that control this state and have a lot of us in problems right now.
Mr.
Okay,
Altman,
Miss-
Mr. Altman, I'm sorry. I completely, this is very honest. I've sat on this board since 2013, and I have candidates like yourself who have said this, and I know that when a registered voter puts their name on a nominating petition, specifically for an independent or someone who is not in the largest of the 2 parties of the state, that is their intent. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to sit in this seat at times and tell someone that there are our role is the form of the petition. We
The
had.
role should be to determine the will of the voters.
I understand
That's
that,
what
but
the
unfortunately,
role should be, ma'am.
our role is to the form. We had to not put on the ballot at our last meeting, but the meeting before, not just governor candidates, but judicial candidates, congressional candidates. And there are individuals who had significance, they had the number of signatures needed. What I ask of you is don't give up and do this again.
No,
That's
ma'am.
what I'm saying.
Miss,
But
Ma'am, I'm 61 years old.
I understand, but I can't, I sit here and I want candidates and individuals to understand that this is not easy for us either.
You're
It is
making
not,
it difficult.
it is not, but no,
Yes,
it's not
ma'am,
easy.
Because right now you could give.
Sir, to tell you that that the signatures are that you don't have enough signatures is not an easy thing for me. Because I can see.
It looks very easy
It
when
is
you're
not
sitting there
easy
saying
for
it.
me.
Then why don't you give
Because
validate my
if we were to do
signature?
that for every candidate, we would have had to have everyone on.
That's
It
not,
didn't follow the rules in the form that we have to follow.
ma'am, you know that was a technical mistake. The ballot
But
was tilted in the printer.
Unfortunately,
and
that
it
is our
took out the bottom
responsibility
line.
is
Mr.
to
Altman.
do that.
we have to move on, and we have a motion with regard to your petition. We do not have the authority to say that the voter's intent is clear and that mistakes are harmless. They are not. You do not have a sufficient number of petition signatures. Thank you for I really do commend your effort, but we do need to move on. Do we have a motion?
What is this, a one-person decision?
No.
You just made a decision for everybody?
No, I did not. I said we have to move on, and we have a motion. So we will have the three members of the Board of Canvassers who are here consider the recommendation of the Bureau of Elections, and we can either accept it or reject it.
I'm sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Okay, I'm trying to understand, is there a vote taken?
Yes, there will be a vote taken.
There will be.
Yes,
Okay, when is that?
Right now,
right now.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Do we have a motion?
yes, we have a motion to follow the staff recommendation and to determine the petition is insufficient.
Do we have support?
I support the motion to move the Board of State Canvassers accept the staff recommendation and find the nominating petition submitted by Barry Altman insufficient.
All in favor? Opposed? All right, the motion carries, and we have found that the petition submitted by Barry Altman is insufficient.
I am a yes vote.
I didn't hear, thank you.
I know. It's okay.
Are you guys just let her kick me off like that?
The next item on the agenda is the assignment of the number designation for the constitutional amendment proposed by the Michigan Legislature, House Joint Resolution R.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gerwitz. So this process is governed by Section 474A of the election law.
That was trash what you did to me. That was garbage what you did to the people of the state also.
Section 474A of the Michigan election law governs the procedure for assigning designations to statewide ballot proposals. In essence, it goes in order of filing. So this proposal under discussion is HJRR, which was filed with the Secretary of State on May 13th, 2022. So it was basically the first petition in chronological order that was complete and submitted to the Secretary of State. So based on that, we are recommending that this be designated as Proposal 22-1 on the November 8th, 2022 ballot.
Any discussion? Okay,
I did ask.
right. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah.
You want to address agenda
Yeah.
item 5,
Yeah,
which is,
thank you.
which is
I-
just the number.
Right,
Okay,
just the number.
you want to
Yeah.
speak at the
Thank you.
microphone?
By letter of June 30th, we suggested to the Director of Elections, given that at the time there were only 3 Board of Canvassers, that this should be designated 22-1 for exactly the reasons he just said. And I want to stand and say this is exactly what the law requires, and it's the right decision.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
With that, can I move that the Board of State Canvassers designate the constitutional amendment submitted by the legislature as Proposal 22-1 on the November 8th, 2022 general election ballot?
And I second that.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. that we designate the constitutional amendment submitted by the legislature as proposal 22-1 on the November 8th, 2022 general election ballot. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next item on the agenda is item number 6, consideration of the 100-word statement of purpose for House Joint Resolution R. Do you want to address this, Mr. Brager?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Goins. So this is HJRR, again, looking forward to just saying 22-1. So this is very similar, but not identical to a petition that was brought before the board previously under a voter initiated petition. It has two basic components. One, it creates disclosure requirements for legislators and executive officers. And two, it changes the term limits that we have for state reps and state senators from a 3 2-year terms in the House and 2 4-year terms in the Senate for a maximum of 14 years to a total of 12 years that can be served in any combination in either body. After I drafted and the board approved a 100-word summary of that previous petition, the legislature passed a similar, again, non-identical resolution to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment doing those two things. So under Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution, the legislature can do that. And under Section 32 of the election law, when we receive a proposed constitutional amendment from the legislature, I am directed and the board, I'm directed to draft and the board is directed to approve a 100-word summary of that proposed amendment, which is a true and impartial statement of the purpose and does not create prejudice for or against the amendment, along with a caption that accompanies it. So I have drafted the proposed language that you have before you. It is similar, again, but not identical to the language that the board previously approved for the voter initiated version of this. The legislature included in the resolution a word summary or a summary of the amendment that was 110 words, stating that was the intent of the legislature that be the summary. There was an argument presented, and I'm sure will be further elaborated on today, that that myself and the board are bound to follow the legislature's summary. I read that. But I note that the election law specifically requires that when something is submitted to us under Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution, that I have to draft and the board has to approve the summary. So again, with that in mind, there is a lot of overlap between the wording of the summary that I proposed with both what the board previously approved and also what the legislature included, but they're not identical. And so I'm going to read for the board the proposed caption and summary, which is as follows. Proposal 22-1, a proposal to amend the state constitution to require annual public financial disclosure reports by legislators and other state officers and change state legislative term limit to 12 total years in legislature. And then the summary is the proposed constitutional amendment would require members of legislature, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, and attorney general file annual public disclosure reports after 2023, including assets, liabilities, income sources, future employment agreements, gifts, travel reimbursements, and positions held in organizations except religious, social, and political organizations. Require legislature implement, but not limit or restrict reporting requirements. Replace current term limits for state representatives and state senators with a 12-year total limit in any combination between House and Senate, except a person elected to Senate in 2022 may be elected the number of times allowed when that person became a candidate. Should this proposal be adopted? Yes, no. And that's exactly 100 words.
Thank you. Does the board have any questions for Mr. Brader?
Not yet.
Okay. We have a number of people who have asked to speak to item number 6. I am going to impose a 3-minute time limit for speakers. So first, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was going to first ask, are there any members of the legislature since they're the opponent?
Well, I guess we do have a question about whether whether people are speaking for and against the proposal submitted by Mr. Brader. If you would prefer to follow Mr. Liedl and Mr. Gordon, who I believe are going to speak in favor of the legislature's proposed language.
I would
That
like to precede that, and I am, since no one from the legislature is here,
No, there is no one from the legislature here.
I would like to precede them, and I'm going to recommend that we adopt largely what Mr. Brader says, but with some amendments, which I will hand to you. Okay, so thank you. First, let me say, thank you, election director. You did the right thing by not letting the legislature both adopt a resolution to amend the Constitution, allow themselves stay in office longer, and dictate to you how it should be described to the voters. It was a very interesting essay written by two esteemed election lawyers here, but it's not one that should have bound you. So you did the right thing. And the board here is the body that should decide how this is described to the voters, not the interested party, the legislature. I'm going to make a couple suggestions amending what you have done. First, I'm going to note that it was a unanimous Board of Canvassers meeting in March that said this would replace the current term limits, not change, not strengthen, streamline, enhance, or any of the other things that have said, replace. That's because it actually repeals. In March, I held up the language. I'll do it again, but in 3 minutes, I will not. It actually repeals, abrogates, strikes out the term limit amendment as it's now. So therefore, it should be described as either repeal and replace or replace. Consistent with my agreement with what we had done in the unanimous board, I say just describe it as replace. I'll accept that. Next, the proposal by the election director does make a few technical errors here in that it says that the HJRR requires disclosure of income, assets, and liabilities. Actually, it doesn't require you to disclose income. It does not require you to disclose assets and doesn't require you to disclose liabilities. It says sources of income, description of assets, and description of liabilities, which should be described in a law that doesn't take effect if it's adopted until 2024. I think actually you've got sources of income, but the correct words, and I would say just use the words in the proposal, are sources of income, description of assets. Also, the language doesn't require reporting of gifts. That's already in law. It just says affirms that. Finally, I would say that this board needs to consider not only for this proposal, but for other ones, what do you do with proposals where there is two things put in? One that is uniquely unpopular with the voters, like repealing term limits or changing other constitutional things, and one which sounds really good, like disclosure or transparency. In this particular case, as is obvious, they put a little sweet with the bitter, and the proposal in front of you would put the sweet first, even though it is largely an exhortation for the legislature to pass a weak law in 2024. I would argue you should put the more important first, and this is something that you're going to have to deal with in many more proposals, not just this one. And with that, Madam Chairman, if I could approach, I have a substitute to give you.
Okay, please do.
Okay. What I'm proposing here be adopted keeps the words that the election director drafted with very small changes. I put in, going from the bottom to the top, I saved a couple words about implement the reporting requirements, and then I put the exact words in the proposal: description of assets, description of liabilities, sources of income, right from the proposal. Then this sentence or this sentence here, replace current term limits. This is what the unanimous Board of Canvassers adopted in March. I agreed with it, haven't changed a word.
Okay.
And then I think it should go right in the top. The caption must say replace or repeal. It can't say strengthen, change, whatever. Madam
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mr. Anderson.
And
Do we have any
election director.
questions for Mr. Anderson about his suggestions?
No, but I appreciate having something typed out.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next, Stephen Lidle and Gary Gordon. I don't know which of you is going to speak. Both of you.
Just one.
Oh, good to see you both.
Just one of us speak, but we're both here. We're co-counsel to the campaign Voters for Transparent Term Limits. Good morning, Madam Chair, Member Bradshaw, and good morning to Member Housecamp. This is my first opportunity to appear before the board since your appointment by the governor. Thank you very much for your service to the public as a member of the board. We appear today on behalf of Voters for Transparency and Term Limits. This is a coalition of citizens and organizations supporting greater financial transparency for elected state officials and a reduction in the total number of years a person may serve in the legislature. We support Proposal 22-1, which was placed on the ballot by a bipartisan supermajority of 76 members of the House of Representatives and 26 senators. The legislature doesn't speak by individual legislators. The legislature speaks as a body through either bills it adopts or resolutions it adopts. It's spoken to the commission today and expressed its intent for the ballot language in the resolution as a body. When adopting the proposed resolution, they included that language. Both the actual content of the legislature's approved constitutional amendment and the text of a recommended summary are included. The legislature summary is a fair statement of the purpose of the constitutional amendment. So ask yourself a simple question. Who's a better judge of the intent of the legislative proposal than the legislature that passed it? The constitutional amendment proposed by the legislature under Section 1 of Article 12 of the Michigan Constitution, under the words of the Constitution, must be submitted to the electors at the next general election or special election as the legislature shall direct. That is the constitutional mandate. The legal reasons why you should approve a ballot summary consistent with the summary adopted by the legislature are detailed in our August 10th letter to the director. Given this, you can adjust the director's language for better consistency with the legislative summary in 3 steps. 1, in the caption, replace change with reduce. On the first line of the 3rd bulleted paragraph, change replace to reduce. Also on the first line of the 3rd bulleted paragraph, change with to 2. On reduction, the math is simple. Under current law, legislators can serve terms equaling 12 years, or 14 years, I'm sorry, plus an unlimited number of partial terms. Under the proposed amendment, legislators can be elected to a term if their total legislative service would exceed 12 years. 14 plus is always greater than 12. Moving from 14 plus to 12 is always a reduction. You don't need to summarize argument or speculative theories about what this amendment might do. Michiganders elected to the legislature wrote this proposal, and Michiganders are capable of summarizing it on their own. If the board is inclined to make any changes to the director's proposed ballot statement, we would urge the board to make our 3 proposed changes for greater consistency with the language adopted by the legislature.
Can you conclude, Mr. Lidle?
Sure. We make these arguments to preserve them in the event the board convinces the board to make changes to the director's language and preserve the arguments in any appeal. That being said, we're prepared to accept the director's proposed summary. It's not perfect, but it's true and impartial.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Keith Alred.
I'm speaking opposing the HARR. I'm with the ballot committee that's will be posting on November ballot, and I'm speaking in support of the language that Patrick Anderson gave you, and specifically why I believe that the elections director and this board should concur that the transparency portion of this amendment should come second. On May 11th, 2022, 102 members of the Michigan legislature voted to pass HARR. Members of both chambers and both parties came together in a coordinated fashion to pass this amendment with no comment or debate from any of the 102 members that voted to place this question in front of voters. This was not happenstance. I used to work in the legislature, and I want to assure you, if something like this happens, it was carefully coordinated and executed behind the scenes. It doesn't happen by accident. Nothing was stopping those 102 members that evening from instituting the transparency portion of HJRR immediately. They clearly had the votes. Everybody was present and ostensibly supportive. The transparency requirements of this amendment do not require any constitutional amendment or ballot proposal to institute. They are simply laws that could have been implemented and applied to the legislature the evening of May 11th when they voted for this. The only portion of HJRR that takes immediate effect is the repeal and replacement of Michigan's term limits. It is also the only portion of HJRR that requires voter approval. All 102 members of the legislature that voted for this had a personal stake in the matter. They all became eligible to stay in their careers longer than the rules allowed when they were initially elected. It was impossible for them to be impartial when they dictated the ballot language in HJRR. These were political members of a political body making a political decision that they would immediately benefit from. An impartial statement of Proposal 1 should not begin with transparency. The most sophisticated political actors in our state capital, both in the public and private sector, came together to coordinate and engineer this resolution's passage. I will note 102 members of our legislature voted for this, and not one of them showed up today. Instead, the people speaking on behalf of it are lawyers that were hired by a coalition of business groups and lobbyists to speak on a previous proposal. We still have not heard from the members of the legislature. They have brought to bear an understanding of the governmental process they know that average voters could never hope to grasp. We saw that today at this meeting. They have assumed since the day that they poll tested and tailored the language for this proposal that their knowledge of the process would steamroll their language right through this body, placing that language in front of their constituents in an effort to induce their constituents to vote for a policy they never would support if written objectively. 102 members of the Michigan legislature voted for this resolution. Not a single one has offered any insight into their logic behind it. They could have been here today to advocate for their own proposal, but nobody came. They do not want to be on the record supporting this proposal, and they do not want to answer the question I would ask them now. If they believed in this transparency provision, why did they not vote for it and institute it that evening? Their actions show
Mr. Elder,
intent.
you want to?
I have one more sentence. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Their actions that evening show their intent, and the intent was to deceive. I ask you today to describe this ballot proposal in an objective way that reflects the legislature's policy priorities and place the repeal and replacement of term limits first in the transparency section following. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Allred? Hearing none. The next person to speak is Kurt O'Keefe.
Thank you. I don't know if you can give me like a 20-second
Head start.
I signed when I'm running out of time. Also speaking against the proposal. When I was here last time, I said, never have so few put so much lipstick on such a pig. What happened is that at the non-public meeting, the legislature scraped off most of the lipstick, leaving only a thin veneer, which actually amounts to nothing. And they left the pig intact because that's what they want. Their intent is clear, as Mr. Allard indicated. I joined Mr. Anderson in asking and applauding the director for not being steamrolled by the legislature, which again, he's being asked to do today, and this body is being asked to do. I propose the true and impartial summary Mr. Anderson has presented, as opposed to the legislature's description of the pig as something vague and smothered in savory transparency sauce. Well, let's look at this transparency provision, which is part of the charade of what this ballot proposal summary really is. It pairs non-disclosure with the non-reduction of term limits proposed by non-transparent transparency activists. There is no 14-year limit in the Constitution now. There's no 14-year limit. There's no term limit of 14 years for anyone. This was all done in secret, just like the petition ballot drive came to life, fully formed with money committed, possibly due to the election director and this board last time changing the summary. We never saw signs of a petition movement. We never saw them circulated. They saved lots of money because the legislature went through after a press conference on Tuesday afternoon between 10 and 11 a.m. The House and Senate passed it. According to the official House clerk record, it was not even written down until the next day. They were so proud of their accomplishment, they left town. They adjourned, canceling previously scheduled capital events with no notice, no hearings, no testimony, no record of any kind, of any intent. and without any public input from anyone. One concocted, completely concealed from public view. Proud of their, yes, today, I'm unaware, I've got a lot of candidate events. I haven't seen any incumbents say one word explaining, let alone trying to justify their vote for this travesty, let alone the disgraceful manner in which it was passed. Mr. Studley is on the committee, the petition committee, whatever they call themselves, transparency. He gave away the game, if quoted accurately, in the push-pull story done by Beth LeBlanc of the Detroit News. Quote, hopefully the balance and fairness and the straightforward nature of the proposal comes true to people when they hear the 100 per proposal, Studley said. He did not say when they read it and understand it. He did not say what it actually does. He said when they hear it, meaning what he wants is the inaccurate ballot summary, and they were pulled on the one that was approved here, which is not this one, which is going to be decided today. Reducing, strengthening, lowering term limits, ice cream, financial transparency.
Mr. O'Keefe, do you want to conclude, please?
This is my big finish, although there's no, I'm saying the transparency, it gives nothing but a right to sue. No court can require the legislature to pass a law. So reducing, strengthening term limits, ice cream, financial transparency for government officials, and all expense paid vacations to a destination of your choice. What, you might ask, do these seemingly four disparate items have in common? I will tell you two things. One, they're all wildly popular. And two, none of them are in this proposal. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. O'Keefe? The next person to speak is Scott Tillman.
Thank you, Board
Good
members.
afternoon, Mr. Tillman.
Good
Good
afternoon.
morning still.
Good morning still. You know, this was HJRR, and it probably should have stayed HJRR with R being like the piracy amendment, where they're trying to steal more time in the legislature, because this is ridiculous. Now, unlike Mr. Altman's situation, which is very bad, and there's nothing you can do, the sport's hands are tied. For this situation, you can actually influence this ballot title. This is coming to you. It's written by the elections director, and you get to decide what the people see, which is important because people are questioning the integrity of our elections process. And if they go to the ballot and see something that they later feel like they were deceived, they're going to lose more faith in our elections process. And I don't think that we have reasons to lose faith in our elections process. There are mistakes, but they're being remedied. I mean, we went from 50% to 98% of the precincts in Wayne County. I mean, that is huge. And that can be remedied just by the attention being brought to it. You have the power to make sure that people get an accurate idea of what they're going to vote on here. You four are going to be the only people who can provide the voters with an accurate description of what they're going to be voting on. This proposal is all about term limits, and people love term limits. A lot of people in this area in Lansing don't understand why people love term limits, but they love term limits because it means more people in the legislature and they feel more connected to the body that represents their interest. That's why people love term limits. But legislators don't like it, cuts down their time. Lobbyists hate it because it makes it harder for them to influence. When there's less legislators, it's easier for lobbyists to influence those legislators. So they don't like it. Now, if I wrote it and it was up to me, I could make a really solid ballot title that ran this proposal right into the dirt, would make voters oppose it on the thing, but that's why you don't let the proponents and the opponents write the ballot title. The legislature sent you over something and clearly they have a biased interest. The term limits portion of this is going to give them a significant amount of more time. There are over 400 term limited legislators who can't come back and serve in the House who will be able to return if this passes. That's out of 700 that have served since we passed term limits. Over 400 of them would be able to come back and serve more time in the House. It's a huge giveaway on time. It is adding more time for those individuals, in no way reducing time. The transparency portion of this is toothless and fluff, and it's entirely unenforceable, and it's only included to deceive voters. It's just there to deceive voters. And in your position, you have the power to move it to the second thing that people read so that they get a more accurate description of what they're going to be voting on. People depend on you to know. I mean, they're going to go there and read it. They're going to see a lot of ads on both sides before, but they depend on you for that accurate ballot description. So either you tell people the truth or they're going to start thinking that, they're going to start having less faith in our elections process. Can the legislature use technicalities in the law
to pull a fast one on voters, that's what you're going to decide today. So thank you very much for your time. Fortunately, this is entirely to form, and it is something that you do have direct power over. Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Tillman? Do we have discussion?
I
of
have
this issue?
questions.
Well, you
Yes.
said, sorry, Vice Chair. She said she was going to council.
All right, I'm sorry.
You said you were going to let James Gallen speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. When I don't see him, I forget that he's there. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is James Gallant. These are my opinions, and I'm against this proposal. Because like I said, your current practices on this agenda items appears to violate everyone's rights under the Constitution and under my rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act to address every approved agenda item. I hereby call shenanigans. First, this canvassing board currently has only 3 members, a majority of Democrats, in direct contradiction to the Constitution. Marquette County did the same thing in the 2020 presidential election. There was only 3 members, majority of one party. That's against the Constitution. Please schedule a special meeting to positively identify the approved rules of order by vote of this commission. This is the really big lie, because the current practices have not received the majority vote of this board. All deliberative assemblies under Robert's Rules of Order speak by majority vote, like that other person said. And guess what? You're denying them right now the current practices. You are the bully with a gavel. A bully is a person that oversteps their authority and other people's rights are being violated. This is exactly what this is, institutionalized bullying. And you're doing it over and over and over. You act like this is okay. Well, you forgot I was here? I got an accommodation under the federal law, and you forgot I was here. And I'm offended. I'm seriously offended on that. I can tell you that. Can you hear me? Sorry, I had on much. Did you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, guess what? This is a really big lie, and you are the bully with the gavel. You just took the gavel and you just started doing whatever you wanted. You said, we're going to impose 3 minutes here. Really? There's no rule that was voted on that says discretion of the chair. Like Jonathan Brader, I believe he lied to this commission or this board because he didn't know what the rule was and he made it up. He said 3 minutes at the discretion of the chair. If those words are not in a vote, I am going to review every set of minutes from the first day this board was in 1850. And we're going to find out what the rules were. And it used to be Robert's Rules. 1963, the Constitution was written according to Robert's Rules of Order. That was the deal of the day. And it was everything's in the affirmative. Absolutely. Yes is yes, no is no. And you just voted to find yes, it's insufficient. Yes, it's no. And that is the problem. And it's like you don't even know the rules. It's like you just showed up and pandered to the people, pandered to the governor to keep on this board and just keep doing whatever they're doing. And you know what? It's interesting that the Republicans is the chair. Commissioner and Mr. Schinkel did this for how long? Okay, the Republicans cheated in Wayne County. She didn't follow the rules. But guess what? The Democrat was a little bit slicker, and he turned around and said, hey, let's vote twice in direct contradiction to the rules. And he did that and then waived reconsideration. That's a scam. That's the really big lie. And now that guy appears to be a Wayne County Board of Commissioners. Really? Is he going to be representative next? Probably. For the Democrats, you are the problem and you are the big lie. This is the big lie that you're following the rules here. This is important. And I suggest that guy that got his petition insufficient go to court and he challenged the rules here and your current practice.
Do we have questions?
I do have questions. And actually, I think that the person I should probably be directing that to would probably be Heather. What is the legal standing on this? Or can you, or what, when the legislature puts into their joint resolution wording?
I haven't had a lot of time to look at this. I think it's somewhat unclear. I think looking at section 32, section 32 was amended by the legislature in 2012. If you look at 32, it suggests that the legislature either did not believe it had the authority to propose ballot language, or because the Constitution is in fact silent, or so it was delegating or assigning that task to the director, just as it has with respect to section 2. So I think they're different ways that we could, maybe this could be thought of, but we don't have, that would be a question for the court. I mean, what we do have in front of us is the statute, and the statute says that the director drafts it under both section 1 and section 2 of Article 12. And so I think that's what would guide us today until a court would tell us otherwise.
Any questions, Mr. Huskamp?
I like that.
Okay. Do we have any further discussion?
This is just a question. I think that's Mr. Anderson question.
Sure.
Is that allowed?
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Sir, you made a couple of points on the way through. And again, I'm coming late to this party, so I apologize.
I'm glad that you're here. Let me join my colleague in saying thank you for serving on this. And I'm sorry, Mr. Dawn is not here for the personal.
You made a couple of statements about the summary, and it doesn't accurately reflect what the ballot proposal calls for in terms of real disclosure.
That's right.
Could you just recast that for me, please?
Sure. I'm holding up HJRR here, and I'm noting that I'm reading in what is the new subsection 2. And here it says by April 15th, 2024. So one of the things I said is nothing happens immediately, not until 2024. A report required to be filed under this section must include information regarding all the following: description of assets and sources of unearned income, sources of earned income, descriptions of liabilities. This is different than saying income. Our Constitution has an income tax. We all file income tax returns. You know, you can't just describe your income. You got to put a W-2 down. You got to put down exactly, right? I would counsel everyone present, do not attempt to file your tax return with just an essay on where you got the money. They will be taxing you. So what I'm suggesting, among other things, a technical correction, and I suggested exactly the words that are here. Does that address your question, Mr. Huskamp?
No, that answered.
Okay. All right. And I'll note further, if you can see the other points I made about this doesn't require reporting of gifts by lobbyists. That's already required by state law, as is acknowledged here. Requirements, payments made as prescribed by state law. In other words, there's already a state law about some of this, so it's not new and it shouldn't be listed as if it's a new requirement in this particular proposal.
But it doesn't damage anything by having it reaffirmed.
No, it doesn't. It's not worth the words to describe it. And certainly it would be misleading if you were to tell the voters that this creates a requirement for reporting of gifts by lobbyists. That's already in state law.
Okay, Mr. Lidl, I think, wants to respond to Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to provide our perspective on the question, on two things. I believe the director, who's done a good job, I thank the director for his work on the summary. I want to be clear, we do support the director's summary. He accurately describes income sources. There's no need to use additional words relating to liability. This is a summary, not a recitation of every word that's used in the proposal. And I want to make sure that the board has accurate information about the gifts that are required to be disclosed, because under current law, lobbyists are required to report gifts to lobbyable public officials, but the constitutional requirement in HTRH imposes a new requirement, not on lobbyists, but on legislators and other elected officials. I'll point you to the language in HTRH. It is in section 10, subsection F, subdivision F. Gifts received and required to be reported by a lobbyist or lobbyist agent. So that would be gifts received by the legislature or other elected official. This is the list in 2 that requires not lobbyists to report the information, but the legislator or other executive elected official. So I believe the director has well summarized and accurately summarized the contents of the proposal. And we'd be happy to answer any questions you'd have.
Thank you, Mr.
Can I ask a question? Because you went very quick and I appreciate. What were I just want to make sure, are you saying that you are approving what the director has, or did you made some changes, but you did them really quick?
Voters for Transparency and Term Limits supports the director's proposal. We wanted to preserve for the record if the board decided to make changes or if there are any appeals of the board actions today, our argument with regard to the intent of the legislature. But we do support the director's proposed language.
Okay. That was a little blurry for me.
May I speak? There's one point, I have a question about that point. So the gentleman that was just speaking are representing the Voters for Transparency and Term Limits Committee, which submitted a different petition language in March for this. The only thing that the legislature changed in that petition in HJR were matters pertaining to the transparency section. They actually watered down certain standards that the Voters for Transparency set them to. So I just want to make sure for clarification purposes that we're speaking about HJR, which is a different transparency section than the Voters for Transparency.
Yeah, we understand that we are speaking about HJR. R. Any further discussion? Okay, do we have a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion. I move that the Board of State Canvassers approves the statement, purpose prepared and submitted on August 19th, 2022 by the Director of Elections for House Joint Resolution R designated as Proposal 22-1 on the November 8th, 2022 general election ballot.
I support.
Okay, it has been moved and supported. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Okay. The motion carries, and the Board of State Canvassers has approved the statement of purpose prepared and submitted on August 19th,
Sorry,
2022
Vice
by
Chair
the
Dillis,
Director of
can we-
Elections.
Can we just clarify what the vote was there?
With
3-0.
right? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And try to be loud this time.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to make sure. I appreciate it. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, okay. So we have approved the statement prepared and submitted by the Director of Elections for House Joint Resolution R designated as Proposal 22-1 on the November 8th, 2022 general election ballot. The next item on the agenda is, if I can find my agenda, adjustments to the board's regularly scheduled meeting. We have a scheduled meeting for September 9th, and we would like to reschedule that meeting to September 7th.
Other way.
Other way.
The other way?
Yeah, September 7th, move it to September 9th.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
We need
Just
to make a
looking at-
motion on that?
Right,
Okay, I'd make a motion.
Adjustments.
I would make the motion that we adjust our publicly. I can't like our publicly posted meetings to reflect the change from September 7th to September 9th. Are we changing the time? Or is that going to?
okay, it has been moved and supported that we change the posted meeting from September. I'm missing it
I had a
again.
question
September
before
7th. From September 7th to September 9th.
Madam Chair, if we can clarify if we have to do a time change before we move on that one.
What
Because-
I would suggest is if the board is okay with it, change the date to the 9th. If we do need to change it from our ordinary time to earlier in the day or later, we can do that with a subsequent meeting notice.
Okay,
So
so it has been moved and supported. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. So motion carries 3-0. Do we have any other business to be brought before the board? None? Adjourned by
You just
acclamation.
adjourn. That's what Norm would say. You just adjourn.
Okay, we are adjourned at 11:20. Thank you.
No problem.
It's been such a long time. How are you? He's always eloquent.